So emotions are usually subjective and it's different from each person. So do you employ, like, do you use any method to keep it as objective as possible when investing in the stock market? Or do you go by with your experience and just the sentiment at the current sentiment?
Mm. It's a good question. I think the huge emotions, though, are more likely to be the same all around the world and across generations. So very severe panic or fear, and also extreme greed. I think that's much easier to kind of see, right? So if a client in, say, for example, March is sending me a blind panic WhatsApp or email, then that's much easier to see that it's clear that it's emotional, right? So I think, first of all, we have to make a distinction between the smaller emotions, subtle things, and the very obvious things. So some emotions are very clearly, obviously, either fear or greed. But for some of the more subtle emotions, I think familiarity is a big one. So we're all more reassured by what's familiar, what's normal, but that causes a lot of problems. So when it comes to each individual, of course, it's impossible to read everyone, right? Because I'm not a psychologist, but I think the more things are either fear or greed, or things like being reassured by what's familiar. So if everybody else is doing something like buying a certain stock, we're more likely to buy it ourselves. Or if our parents are British, we're more likely to buy property. If our parents are Indian, we might be more likely to buy gold, and so on and so forth, right? So being reassured by what's normal or what's familiar, people do it subconsciously. It's not like people always consciously think, oh, well, I'm buying property because everyone else in my country does the same thing. Well, I'm buying gold because I'm Indian. People don't always think, deeply about it. So often it's subconscious. But once you've been doing what I've been doing for a long time, you can kind of notice some commonalities, and you can kind of just keep people calm as well. I think the real destructive emotions, though, I think fear and greed are the two most destructive emotions, because they're the most likely to cause you to do stupid things with your money, right? Because if you sell at the very worst time, for example, like in 2008, 2009, that could cost you what? It could mean you can't retire in some cases. It means you might have to work
Yeah.
until you're dead, right? It's very severe. And I think those very severe emotions are the issue. But I think the key thing also is if somebody acts on them or not. We all have emotions, but the bottom line is if you don't act on that, if you feel fearful but you decide not to sell, it doesn't really matter. It's if you act on those emotions, right? So recognizing that an emotion is actually what it is, just an emotional reaction, I think is also quite important to stop you doing those negative things with your money.